Hey, welcome back to this second video in the series where we are learning the fundamentals of SQL and also sprinkling in some of the so what that the business side of your organization is going to care about. So if you want to catch up with where we are now, pause this video, go back and watch the first one. Where we left off was aggregations. So we learned about grouping the data and how we can do a basic aggregation, getting the total count of customers who churned or who didn't churn. And now we'd like to expand on that a little bit. Knowing the customer counts are great with churn, but customers spend different amounts of money. So a natural question that's going to come from a business that cares about revenue and profit margins is going to be, well, what's the average revenue per customer who is churning versus who's not churning? So let's dive back into the technical details a little bit to understand how we can make this happen in SQL. So we can, again, select from the same data source we were accessing before. That's our customer churn table. And what we can select this time is still the churn dimension. We still want to see our yes and no outcomes of if people churned. But now we want to also bring into the picture some of these revenue metrics. In the previous video, we did a little bit of a eyeballing of the data that's available to us in this churn data set. And we noticed that there is a total charges column, and there's also a monthly charges column. Now we can infer that total charges is the overall amount of money that a customer has ever spent, and monthly charges is how much they're spending each month. So we can think of this also as lifetime value and recurring revenue. So depending on what specifically the business cares about, one of these metrics might be more relevant than the other. But we can look at them both for now and see what we can learn from this data while learning a little bit about SQL. So we are going to take the average of our total charges, and we're going to take the average of our monthly charges because we want to see for each category of customer, people who did churn and people who did not, what is the average amount that their lifetime value is and that their recurring revenue is. So let's go ahead and run this, and we can get an error from the SQL query not properly implementing a group by. So previously we had seen we need to tell the query that we want to group by churn because we're aggregating these other measures. So let's add that in. We want to make sure that we are grouping by churn. And now when we run this query, we're going to see that we have two columns giving us some numbers, but they're not really user-friendly. They're not named very well. So I had referred to total charges as lifetime value, and I had referred to monthly charges as recurring revenue. So maybe we'll just call this lifetime revenue as well, just to be consistent. So lifetime revenue, recurring revenue. Let's go ahead and rerun this. It's looking a little bit better. So I would add one more thing here, and this is a nice thing to keep in mind whenever you're presenting data to an audience, especially if you are more on the technical side. If you're relatively technical compared to the person you're talking to, you might want to just smooth out the rough edges of the data. And in this case, we can do that by rounding our numbers to something that looks a little bit more like the real world. If these are US dollars, nobody's talking about 400 decimals of a dollar. People would only care about up to 2 decimals at most. So let's just round to 2 decimals for both of our outputs, and this is going to reduce the clutter. We now only see the information that's relevant, and our columns have nice labels. Sometimes it's the small things. Even though these small things might not be really important to a technical person, you have to think about if you want people who aren't technical to hear the message that you're trying to convey, you want to reduce the amount of things that are going to distract them from what's important. Is it really important if we have 5 decimals of numbers in this column? No. But if a person who's not technical is staring at this number wondering why there are 6 decimal places, their mind is wandering into the wrong place. They're not thinking about the things you want them to be thinking about. For example, what we might want them to be thinking about is, hey, isn't it interesting that people who churn have a higher recurring revenue? So every month when they pay their bill, they're paying more than somebody who didn't churn. But in terms of lifetime revenue, these customers are far less valuable. This is a kind of insight that might tell you, if you make short-term decisions just based on who is going to pay more once, that might seem like a good idea. These people are paying more money, but there's something about these people who are paying less money each month that makes them much more valuable over time because they're sticking around. This type of insight isn't something that's groundbreaking and that's going to completely change the game for someone, but it doesn't give you any answers, but it does help point you in the direction that's going to allow you to ask better questions. Why is it that we're getting so much value out of these people who aren't churning and who are spending less money? What is it about these the dynamic that we have with these customers that's making them stick around for so long versus these people who are spending more money on average for a little while, but then they leave? Once you start asking questions about that, you might end up uncovering some really insightful information that's going to help your business. And this is the kind of mindset you should really bring when you're analyzing data and when you are in the relatively technical role and you're trying to spar ideas with people who are less technical but are really able to call the shots on the product side. If you want to influence the direction that the company's taking, you can help focus on the things that matter and present that in a really useful way to the decision-making process. So one last thing that I want to touch on in this video that kind of sets us up for the next one is an idea of getting to percentages. So now we've seen some average revenue numbers for people who churned and people who didn't churn. The next natural so what that I think would come up would be, give me this in relative language. If I'm a product-y business kind of person, I might be thinking about things like, who are the 20% of my customers who are generating 80% of my revenue, right? Because things aren't always, it's not uniform. Not everybody's spending the same amount. There's some category of customers that are going to be your most valuable. And so a lot of times people will be thinking about that kind of Pareto principle, that 80-20 rule, and percentages are going to help them put the numbers into context. What should I be caring about? Should I even care about the thing that you're showing me? So in order for us to even begin getting to percentages, we kind of hit this first challenge. Right now we're grouping by whether people churned or they didn't churn. But in order for us to get to a percentage of, let's say, what's my total percentage of recurring revenue that I lost to churned customers? Well, in order to know that, I need to know what the total is for people who did churn and people who did not churn. And how am I going to get the total if I'm already chopping my data up into 2 rows, right? If I try to sum the revenue, so let's just take this and let's paste it down below. If I add in here the sum of monthly charges, I call this total recurring revenue. So I have every intention of this trying to be my total. Let's also round this. The trouble is this isn't really a total zoomed out. This is a total that's still being grouped by our churn, this yes or no. So something that a challenge we're going to tackle is how can we use SQL to get us to a point where we could actually have the total overall revenue so that we could divide our recurring revenue that churned or our recurring revenue that didn't churn over the total revenue that our business is operating with, so we can see these percentages. Otherwise, we're just going to be getting percentages isolated to the population of people who didn't churn or the people who did. So in order to set us up for the next video where we explore tackling that challenge, I want to show a couple different ways we can filter data. And so one way that we can filter data is with a where clause. The where clause is going to allow us to say, give me all of this data with the condition that something is true. So for example, where churn is yes. So we only want to see data where churn is yes. What happens now when we run this? We can see that all of the data where people didn't churn, that's been thrown out. So this is really useful when we want to query a subset of the data under some kind of specific condition. This is going to not be useful if we're wanting to actually consider the total population of our customers in the derivations that we're doing up above. It's problematic if we throw out a portion of the data if what we really wanted was to have some metrics that are making use of a subset of the data, but still dividing by the total. So something that we can take a look at and that we'll dive into further in the next video is how do we target filtering maybe some of these metrics without doing something as dramatic as completely throwing out all of the data for example, customers who did not churn. So tune in for the next video where we'll be diving into tackling this challenge and working towards getting that percentage of all-time revenue and recurring revenue that is churning.